Well, welcome everyone to our IoD Property and Built Environment Group webinar on the Africa opportunity. We're just going to give it another minute or so to let various guests log into the session. Hopefully you're all looking forward to what we hope is going to be a very informative and interesting session for everyone. We've got some really good speakers and a very good session planned, and we've even got a wonderful sponsor with Estate Intel. Thank you for Estate Intel. And with that, I think I can see a load of participants coming in now. So why don't we move forward, just so we keep the time for everybody. And thank you all for joining us at lunchtime, by the way. My colleague Tim is going to be doing the technology for us. So Tim, if you could move to the next slide, please. Thank you very much for joining us for a panel discussion with a wonderful group of experts on the Africa opportunity. We're going to look at the property and infrastructure opportunities across the continent. And you can see we've got Joel Pupula from the IoD Africa group, Ben Woodhams from Knight Frank in Kenya, and Peter Young, who's CEO of Broadgate Group and Development Director of SB Digital Infrastructure, Jess Cleland from Broll Property Group, and Bruce Haswell from Turner & Townsend, and I'll be moderating and chairing the event. Next slide, please. So we've got a fairly good agenda for you. We'll have a quick message from our wonderful sponsors, Estate Intel. Thank you for kindly supporting this event. And then the panelist presentations for about 40 or 50 minutes. And then we'll have some discussion followed by Q&A from the audience. And if I can point out for the audience, you should all see a Q&A link. Please put your questions in the Q&A, and then we'll go through those when we get to that point. And then a couple closing remarks before we finish. So next slide, please. I've already introduced myself. I'm Richard Nelson, chair of the Institute of Directors, London Property and Built Environment Group. Next slide, please. Just to tell you a little bit about our group, couldn't miss this opportunity. Property and infrastructure are massive contributors to the UK GDP, circa 13%. So they're incredibly important to our economy and to businesses in the country. And with 1.1 million SMEs in London, and about 20% of those working in property and construction, it has a pretty extensive reach. Next slide, please. And to that end, our role in the IoD, obviously looking to build better directors for a better world, with the Property and Built Environment Group, we are here to be a center of excellence for members who share this interest. And we want to bring together our collective influence in terms of how we interact with government and opinion formers, and also to be an inclusive community of property and built environment members across the sector, from property to real estate, construction, infrastructure, and so forth. Next, please. And our focus is on directors and key people working in the sector. And as I mentioned, this approach of being the vital resource for that group. And it's through this carefully curated range of professional events and policy engagement and activities that we undertake. Next, please. We have a great team, as you can see here, alongside myself. Tim, I mentioned, is running the technology for us today. Thank you, Tim. And then the rest of the team, we have a couple more team members joining our leadership team next week, so we're growing. But collectively, we're responsible for everything you see on the right, and it's quite a range of activities and professional development. And it's not just this leadership team. We have our volunteers from the membership of the IoD. And if anyone's interested who's online and wants to get involved, you can see my IoD email at the bottom, property.london@iod.com. Next, please. What do we prioritize? Well, we try and bring good, timely, relevant content to everybody and good networking and development opportunities. The audience we focus on, as I mentioned, it's representative of the entire sector, not just one or the other. It's not just construction, it's not just real estate, it's everything that touches the built environment. And our visibility through events such as this, as well as our live events and being involved in major industry events. Next, please. And the benefits of membership really fall into these three pillars of IoD. So it's around connecting with like-minded people. It's around developing your skills and learning and innovation and tapping into that sphere of influence that the IoD can offer. Next, please. And that sort of dictates the activities that we do and how we structure what we do. So in terms of connecting, bringing together people for events, tours, social events, and so forth, developing professional skills and sharing through things like our Knowledge Hub, which is in development, and mentorship and work groups, and then using our influence through the IoD policy voice and how we speak to government, and collaborations that we're undertaking to do some research and policy as well. Next, please. So our events really fall under these six categories in terms of our themes, and you'll see these throughout the next couple of years for all of our events. Today's obviously is on the international theme, but you can see the others: investment, sustainability, infrastructure, technology, and design. So all of our events will sort of follow these thematic formats. Next, please. And I mentioned the partnerships. They're very important to us, and that's about enhancing the member value proposition. So we formed a partnership with New London Architecture in January, and we're going to be taking advantage of their research and policy initiatives alongside our own in how we talk to government and how we treat the sector and provide opportunities for the sector to come together. I mentioned major industry events. So I'm serving on the board of the UK REIF, UK Real Estate Investment and Infrastructure Forum, which happens in May in Leeds. And then we're also looking into some social and academic partnerships, as well as teaming with our fellow IoD regions and special interest groups, such as Joel's group with the IoD Africa group. Next, please. And finally, I'll come back to this at the end, but finally, we've got a lot to offer in terms of learning and development and influence in the IoD, the Chartered Director Program, our Policy Voice, which is, again, our opinion surveys that go into government weekly, and the IoD Academy, which brings it all together and how we work in together. And next, please. And I think it's also important to point out the company that we keep. We have a lot of followers and supporters. These are just some of them. Estate Intel will obviously join this list, but I think it's important for everyone to know that as much as we have a big membership from SMEs, we also work with big organizations, and we are an influential voice. So that's the end of my IoD property and built environment sales pitch, but just to give you all a flavor of who we are and what we're up to, and we hope we see more of you in the future. So I think next we're going to have a few words from Tilda Moai, who's with Estates Intel. So if we can move to the next slide, and I think we might have a video to start, and then Tilda can come in just after that. So just bear with us while we switch over to the video.
Thank you so much, Richard, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tilda Moai. I am the Research and Insights Lead at Estate Intel, and my apologies, I don't think that video had any voice to sound to it, but it's fine, we move regardless. Team, are you able to move to my slide presentation? Yes, thank you. So I have the privilege today to set the stage for our discussion. And so over the next 5 minutes, I will be highlighting the state of the economy across Africa and the key themes that are currently impacting the property markets across the continent. Next slide, please. And so since the onset of the pandemic, I think we can all agree that it continues to impact the global economy, and the case has not been any different for Africa. However, over the past year, we have seen economies across the continent start to recover, leaving the continent very well placed to resume business activity. And this can be evidenced by the map on your screens, which is a COVID-19 stringency index that actually tracks up to 9 metrics on government response to the pandemic, including workplace closures and restrictions on domestic and international travel, with 100 being the strictest response. And so we can see that in the context of the global economy, Africa actually remains relatively open for business. Next slide, please. And this recovery has not only been at an economic level, but also at a real estate level. And for today's presentation, I will highlight 3 key themes that are set to continue driving the real estate investment in Africa. And the first one being that we are seeing increasing investment allocation towards alternative sectors, with key investors keen on investment diversification to drive returns. And so social infrastructure sectors such as healthcare, student accommodation, and data centers are seeing increased demand, spurred not only by COVID effects, but also the long-term demographic dividend across the continent. Data centers in particular have seen a boom over the past year, with the African data center market currently estimated at $2 billion, and this is set to more than double by 2025. And it is not only the market size, but also the level of interest that we're seeing in the sector. We're seeing a lot of global, private, institutional, and public capital, and this can be seen from the fair share of transactions that we saw happening across the sector in 2021. And perhaps the most notable acquisition that we also was the transaction for Main One data center in Lagos by US-based Equinix for over $300 million towards the end of 2021. And this trend is set to continue in 2022, with both domestic and international investors seeking to land lucrative deals in the key markets of Lagos, Johannesburg, Cairo, and Nairobi. Next slide, please. Another key trend that we have seen emerging from the pandemic has been a return by investment to the mainstream residential and offices sectors globally. And the case has not been any different for Africa, with the residential sector emerging as a standout performer in the key markets that we track. And this can be attributed to a number of reasons, really. Key government initiatives in cities such as Cairo and Accra, for example, have steered this growth. In Egypt, the real estate sector recorded an 8% annual growth rate in 2021, with the overall residential sector remaining core to this, and due to the record development that they witnessed in the market, in a bid to meet the demand posed. Accra, on the other hand, has seen increased demand in the residential sector due to the government's Year of the Return campaign that aims to have Africans in the diaspora invest in the country. And as a result, the residential sector has remained quite stable, recording annual rental yields of up to 10% on average. And this demand, however, has been a lot more nuanced in cities such as Lagos, where the existing supply deficit in affordable housing, coupled with the growth being witnessed in job sectors such as the tech sector, are spurring demand for young professional housing. And so we are seeing key emerging hotspots such as Yaba outpacing the overall residential market. And when we look down south into South Africa, a change in lifestyle due to the pandemic, coupled with record low interest rates, has spurred a boom in the residential market, with the sector recording a 25% increase year-on-year in residential sales in 2021. Gauteng in particular recorded the highest transactions by volume compared to Western Cape, and demand for prime residential is set to trickle into 2022 as the country continues to adjust to the new normal and tenants continue demanding quality living space, which brings us right into the third and final theme that we're seeing impacting real estate investments, and this is the green agenda. And globally, up to 90% of the economy is now covered by a net zero target. And this is slowly trickling down to the real estate sector in Africa. And as such, across all sectors, we have seen increasing adoption of net zero pledges, with developers, occupiers, and institutional investors such as GrowthPoint, AlphaMid, Ale, Africa Logistics Properties leading the pack. And in terms of its direct impact to real estate, while we are yet to see green premiums actually playing out in the market, we are likely to see brown discounts playing out in the market, making a case for developers and landlords to invest in sustainable buildings, as well as occupiers become increasingly aware of the type and form of spaces that they occupy. Next slide, please. Now, I hope this provides you with a clear overview of the real estate sector in Africa. And as the video earlier showed, at Estate Intel, we are tracking hundreds of developments on a daily basis across key cities in Africa. And therefore, we remain well placed to answer any further questions that you might have through the contact details on your screen, which we'll show in the next slide. But thank you very much for paying attention. I will now hand back to Richard.
Thank you very much, Tilda. Thank you for that introduction and overview of Estate Intel and the Africa real estate market. And we're going to move on to hear more interesting points about the Africa market in general, as well as real estate. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, my colleague, Joel Popula, who is the chair of the IoD Africa Group. Joel, welcome.
Thank you so much, Richard, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone from all around the globe. My name is Joel Popola, and I'm the chairman of IoD Africa Group. My role today is to talk about the special interest group for Africa, which was established late last year. Before I start with the slide, I want to refresh our memory with what Africa stands for and the possibilities across the Africa. Africa is a continent that is made up of 54 countries. We have 1.2 billion people today in the continent of Africa, and we are expected to grow to 2.4 billion by 2050. By 2050 also, we will have between 400 million to 800 million middle-class African. We have about 500 million in extreme poverty in Africa. And the recent parliamentary report in the UK stated that at the moment, we have 2.5 UK trade, 2.5% UK trade with Africa. And I think this is a bit disturbing. When we look at the statistics that I've mentioned earlier, we look at the number of the population we have and all that. Right, my first slide, please. The next one. Yeah, we started the Africa Special Interest Group late last year because there is obvious gap between British businesses here in the UK and expanded to the continent of Africa. So it was a national community. We have membership across Scotland, England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And it is to bring the members who are interested in doing business in Africa, or they have already started doing business in Africa. So that is why we come together to start the Special Interest Group for Africa. And the mandate we have is to stimulate business opportunity and increase business networking among our members and also across the Africa. How do we want to do this? We are doing this in conjunction with the established organization, corporate organizations, government institutions, and African diplomatic missions in Britain. So we are working together with all these established institutions to ensure that IoD members will have little to worry about when they are going to expand their business to the continent of Africa. Next slide, please. Yeah, what is the objective of the Special Interest Group? The first one is to connect members by stimulating business opportunities. We are talking to quite a number of organizations across Africa. We have the British Chambers of Commerce in most of the African countries, and we are working together with them so that if we have members here in the UK who want to expand their business to Africa, we can connect them with appropriate contacts in the continent. To increase business networking, because one of the cardinal points of IoD is to grow, to develop your influence. So that is at the heart of what we are doing also. Also to grow IoD awareness, to grow awareness of the IoD brand and British businesses across Africa that is made up of 1.2 billion potential customers. I think I've mentioned that. And also to develop members by providing the opportunity to improve their perception of Africa. I think most of the issues with businesses here in the UK is about perception. And we want to remove that mindset. We want to encourage businesses, because one of the perceptions is that when you do business with Africa, they will not pay you. That is a wrong perception. Those are the things that we are really after to change. We want to change the people mindset about the Africa as a continent and about the businesses across the Africa. So, and we know that they don't need to be scared, because those perceptions are just a limiting factor for some of these businesses. So we are all out to ensure we change that perception about Africa as a continent. And then it offers members the opportunity to influence the wider African business community, which we are going to do in conjunction with established organizations, as I've mentioned. Next slide, please. Yeah, to offer member access to African events, we are going to have, and this is open to members and non-members of the SIG. We organize events. Our next event is coming up on the 5th of April. And then we are going to have a launch for official inaugural launching of the SIG in May 19th. So to bring people together, to build their influence and to connect them to people that will not ordinarily meet. That is one of our goals. Thank you. Next slide, please. Yeah, the SIG membership is open to members nationally. As I've said, we have members across the country here in the UK. And people are encouraged to join us. You can follow us on our LinkedIn page. We are on LinkedIn, and then you can join us by sending an email to me or to any of our committee members. And we encourage as many people as possible to join us so that we can build this group together. Next slide, please. Yeah, we are a community, a network of peer exchanging ideas. We are an authority, the source of knowledge and experts for everything company director needs to know. And we're a movement, a group of people with a common cause. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Joel, thank you very much. That was really good to hear, and glad to have the Africa SIG up and running, and certainly hope a lot of people out there have some interest in that, and who are interested in doing business in Africa and realize that the IoD is a place that can help and help move that along for you. So thank you very much. Well, now we're going to launch into some real interesting information from Ben Woodhams, the Managing Director of Knight Frank Kenya, and I think he looks after Africa generally now, if I'm not mistaken, but I'll let Ben clarify that for the audience. So Ben, over to you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I hope you can hear me okay. I am currently the Managing Director of Knight Frank Kenya, and will shortly be relocating to London to run the Africa desk, which basically will be Knight Frank's man from Africa in London. So anything anybody needs to know about Africa, as far as Knight Frank is concerned, I will be the first point of call, and that will be from May next year. But thank you very much for that kind introduction. Yeah, so if we can jump into my presentation, please. Yeah, that's me. This is the Africa opportunity. Aha, right. This is following Richard's lead. Excuse me, I just need to take a sip for my sponsored cup of tea. This is Knight Frank across the world. We have in Africa, in particular, we're in 9 territories, 9 countries, 21 offices, 655 people across the continent. 160 of us here in Kenya, a similar number in Nigeria, and basically spread out across all of those territories across the world. So Africa is a very important part of Knight Frank's coverage across the globe, and Nairobi is recognized as one of the, as it says in the bottom left-hand corner there, one of the gateway cities, one of the cities where we expect to see significant growth going into the future. There's only 3 countries that we haven't worked in Africa over the last 18 months, because we use our existing network of offices to be able to get into those other territories as well, including the Francophone and Portuguese and Spanish speaking countries as well. So thank you very much for that. Move on to the next slide. This is just a very quick snapshot of our services, and I'll come back to the difference between core services and non-core services later, as Tilda has alluded to. But the core services, such as valuation advisory, property management, development consultancy, residential consultancy, capital markets, and then moving into hospitality, leisure, representing the tenant and occupier services, the global diplomatic, agricultural, retail, and healthcare and education, becoming more and more niche sectors that that are starting to occupy our time, representing the interests that investors have on the continent. Next slide, please. So these are some of our research publications. Research is a very important part of what we do. It forms the bedrock of the consultancy, the advice that we give our clients. So these are examples of the recent research documentations that we've done for Africa. The Africa report is done every other year, and in between that, we do Africa Horizons as well, which is a slightly deeper dive into the real estate aspects of Africa as well. And those are available online. Quick, easy Google search, but I will put a link up to the Africa Horizons report in the chat, because I'm going to refer to it in my next slide. Now, on this slide, do forgive me, I think you'll probably find it a little bit difficult to read, but I'll give you the gist of it. So the arrows represent the FDI flows into the continent of Africa from various other places around the world. And so you can see on the left-hand side, we have the United States, 115 different projects ongoing. This is 2019. Obviously, we will have some more up-to-date data on this now, but it just gives you a flavor. So in 2019, 115 different projects representing $3.5 billion US. France, which is in blue, coming out of Europe, just above Africa there, 107 projects representing 5.7 billion. And a lot of those, as you will see, are into former French colonies, but not exclusively. The UK, 83 different projects representing 3.1 billion US dollars. The UAE, out of the Middle East, 71 different projects representing 5.6 billion. Germany, 68 projects representing 4.8, Japan, 43 representing 2.9, and of course the big one, China, 62 projects representing a whopping 9.4 billion US dollars. And then the list on the right hand side is the sectors.
I can't find the phone, can I, Julie?
Sorry. The bottom right-hand side is the sectors that this money is going into. Number 1, real estate. Then we have renewable energy, coal, oil, gas, chemicals, transportation and warehousing, communications, hotel, tourism, metals, paper, food and beverage, and others. And I think we're starting to see a change in this as we move forward. I think we're starting to see more agricultural, a lot of inquiries into Africa for food security purposes, particularly out of the Gulf, buying land in Africa for export of food into the Middle East. Quite a lot of activity there. Then, of course, the other tertiary sectors that Tilda mentioned earlier, which I'll talk about a little bit more on my next slide, please. So what this slide tells us here is, this relates to Kenya in particular, but by and large, it's representative of most of Africa. And it's really a slide that tells us what was happening in these different sectors before the pandemic, during the pandemic. I've said immediate demand because I suppose nobody's told us that we're out of the pandemic yet, and then longer term, moving forwards into the future. So grade A offices, basically we had a fairly, I suppose you could say, because the leases are relatively long, we haven't seen shockwaves in this sector particularly rapidly, as it were, but we have a fairly consistent demand for offices, and I think although we've got that in pink there representing an average demand, a neutral demand, if you like, or moderate, I think it probably will go green over time as demand for office space generally increases. A subsector of the office sector is serviced offices is very interesting, because here we saw strong demand for serviced offices in before the pandemic. And that basically is because of the flexibility that those offices give you in terms of your commitment to the time you are contractually bound to your office space. So a normal office occupier might sign a 5-year lease, whereas if you're in a serviced office, you can give a month's notice or a week's notice and walk away. And that's why it was red during the pandemic, because people did just that. They walked away from the offices and they went and worked from home. Now, if you occupy an office on a 5-year lease, it doesn't matter if you're working from home or not, you're still paying your rent. But as far as the serviced office occupiers are concerned, everybody terminated their agreements and went home. And so they were hit very, very badly during the pandemic. But then we saw the shoes on the other foot now, as people really want that level of flexibility. They want to be able to work from home. They want to be able to change the numbers of staff they've got quite quickly. So serviced offices are back in a big way. In fact, the biggest letting we've done, and since the oil boom when oil was first discovered in Kenya back in the mid 2015, it was to a serviced office supplier earlier this year. Regional shopping centres suffered quite badly. They weren't doing particularly well before the pandemic, made even worse during the pandemic, and we'll see them slowly recover. Neighbourhood malls, we will see a better recovery from them. They're the smaller malls fitting into the local catchment areas. So I think we'll see a quicker recovery from those, and some more investment into that sector. Prime residential, this is a slightly difficult one to call, because it really does vary from region to region. But generally speaking, the outlook for them is moderate. But we have seen some areas of Africa that have seen a migration from one area to another, which has driven house prices up quite high, in the same way that we've seen in London and other places in the world. Affordable housing has been strong throughout, really, in Kenya, because it's one of the 4 pillars of the current government's commitment to economic growth. And logistics, similar, as Tilda touched on. Hospitality, hotels have been hit very badly, and so I think that that they will recover. They will recover both in terms of tourism, but also in terms of conferencing, which is a big part of the business in this part of the world. And then beyond that, we get into student housing, data centers, agriculture, healthcare, infrastructure, if you like, the tertiary sectors within real estate. And these have all been, they were fairly positive before, and they have been, immune is probably the wrong word to the pandemic, but they've certainly been fairly strong during the pandemic. And as we come as well, healthcare, of course, infrastructure too. We've seen a lot of FDI into that. So that is the picture that we're seeing here. I think really just the only other thing for me to say, because I know that we only have 10 minutes each, is that we have seen in Africa generally, it is interesting to note that although Africa represents 17% of the world's population, it's really only seen 3% of the world's total global FDI. So I think we'll probably address the reasons why that is during the Q&A. But thank you. That's it for me. Over to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Ben, thank you for that. That was really insightful, and I really appreciated your rundown of the markets at the end there. That gives a very good perspective on what's happening. And interestingly, I think our friend Peter, who's going to try and speak to us now, is going to touch on some of those as markets. Peter is an investor and developer operating across Africa. Now, apologies to Ben for the slight interruption on the audio before. Peter's been having some trouble with the audio settings, but we're going to give it a go. I think we should be able to hear him, but he may not be able to hear our
Hi, good afternoon. Peter Young, CEO of Broadgate. Very happy to see you all here today. Over the last 7 years, Broadgate team have developed on behalf of Tier 1 investors across Africa, institutional standard development, including retail mall, offices and mixed-use development, with an end-of-day investment value of about $1.2 billion. In Nigeria, we delivered the first LEED compliant project in Lagos, Heritage Place, 18,000 square meters. And I think it's important in terms of companies like ourselves leading in design and innovation throughout the continent. We now have a development funding platform with our funding partner, Stronghold Global Finance, a London-based FCA approved fund. So what is driving growth? In a recent UN report, Africa is some of the least developed countries in the world. It is indeed the fastest growing continent, the second largest continent in terms of land area, and second largest in population only after Asia. Current population stands about 1.39 billion and targeted to double by 2050 to 2.5 billion. Demographically, it is indeed the youngest in the world. I would say probably in early teens. What we have here is a growing aspirational, educated middle class, which will have an enhanced spending capacity. We're also experiencing urbanization from villages and the farm communities, big moves into the cities, so these will grow significantly in the future. They will indeed deliver probably some of the super cities in the future. The economies are growing. The largest economies by GDP are Egypt, 1.38 trillion, Nigeria, 1.14 trillion, and South Africa, 861 billion. World Bank, in a recent report, indicates in 2022, experiencing the fastest economic growth of about 3.7%, including Morocco, Kenya, Ghana, and Egypt. As an example of one of the sectors we specialize in, the telecom sector, the use of smartphones is growing rapidly in that area. What we're finding in Africa, people are using the smartphones indeed for far more applications than in, say, for example, UK and established markets. They will use it for music, movies, banking, as well as their own personal use. So in terms of the market, we're projecting to see data usage probably double over the next 4 years. Opportunities in Africa. We believe growth initially will be mainly in the service sector. Over the next 5 to 10 years, I think we will see a number of international companies requiring to enter and expand into the African marketplace, offices, other commercial facilities. One of the areas we believe, when we're not seeing a great deal of expansion, but is very much needed, is in the manufacturing sector. As an example, in terms of construction materials, when we're undertaking development, at least 60% of the built material is imported, obviously at high cost of importation and duties. As an example, one we're currently looking at as an opportunity to build a manufacturing plant is glass, where in West Africa, there are no glass manufacturing plants as of the moment, all glass having to be imported. So I think there's a piece of work there to be done by with ourselves and with DIT, UKEF, IFC and the like, to promote international industry to partner and expand delivering new manufacturing bases across Africa. That I would see is a major growth opportunity. We see ourselves very much as a soft landing platform for international companies seeking to enter the market or expand within the market, delivering their real estate infrastructure needs, offices, manufacturing, etc. I think that's one of the issues in Africa. We're not seeing a great deal of activities. There's certainly a lack of funding, and that is international companies looking into the market, a high level degree of nervousness and risk perception. Opportunity, for opportunity in terms of the market, certainly infrastructure. African Development Bank estimates 130 to 170 billion dollars need to be invested over the next few years each year. Certainly this is a big focus for us with our funding partner, Stronghold Global Finance. We're seeking to deliver road, rail, deep sea ports, aviation. Medical is an interesting sector. Obviously with COVID, this has very much highlighted the medical infrastructure inadequacies. In Nigeria, I think we're looking at a need for about 38 new hospitals. Accra, probably 12 new hospitals. We also have a platform, a joint venture platform, SB Digital, which will focus upon digital infrastructure, obviously, telecoms, data centers, and green energy delivery. Why is it important to take responsibility for the entire development process? Well, in established markets, it's a very siloed professional discipline structure, with each party having extensive experience, track record, expertise within their discipline, and this works very, very well. In Africa and in other emerging markets, as a developer, we believe we need to be able to deliver a track record and experience in each sector. We typically will partner the professional discipline, whether it be architecture, engineering, or MEP, as an international practice, and partner with a local practice. So you've obviously got a situation there to be managed. That's something we're very interested in doing, because sometimes it doesn't work so well, other times works exceedingly well, and we're seeing great results in terms of local disciplines gaining experience and expertise in sector areas, which is certainly a very good thing to see. So we assume responsibility for the entire development process to de-risk on behalf of the fund, but also on behalf of the tenant. Many international tenants coming into the market, because they see the African marketplace as a high-risk environment, rather than putting their own teams to get together to deliver a project, they will look to an entity such as ourselves and simply say, you know, here's our development brief. We want a new office building, 10,000 square meters, one-stop shop, just please deliver it, you know, with the funding and development. Interesting in these markets, there's not actually a great deal of understanding in terms of development management. We always get asked the question, what is development management? And a lot of people think it's the same as project management, which it definitely it is not. So as a company, we deliver development management, project management, tenant coordination, what we call DMC, which is a form of construction management or design and build in established markets, and also AM and FM. But clearly, in terms of taking responsibility for the entire process, we're seeking to de-risk the process for the fund and the client, but at the same time delivering a more efficient program, enhanced cost, and is attractive to both parties. What are clients looking for, and where is the big demand? Certainly infrastructure, as we've just covered. Logistics is a strong sector requirement, and I think that's mainly, well, part of the reason is due to the fact lack of industrial base, manufacturing base, and therefore significant amount of commodities being imported, and therefore the need for significant logistic facilities, as I mentioned about manufacturing. The challenges in the market. Well, interestingly, in 2021, we've now seen FDI, foreign direct investment, fall by 20%. In the African marketplace, it's regretful we don't see more funds, international funds, entering this marketplace. But as we all understand, there is a high risk perception, and that's something we all, I believe, have to work to try and overcome. Some of the issues affecting international client occupiers that we see and comes up often: quality of design. HSE is an interesting one. Obviously, health and safety in construction process is very important to the occupier and indeed the fund, and it's something which we work very hard to ensure we deliver a high quality of HSE, but across Africa, regrettably, there's not a high standard. Quality of construction, program adherence, and cost control. As I mentioned, we are seeing a lack of international funds entering this marketplace, mainly due to the fact, obviously, they see it as a too high risk environment. And I think, my feeling is that we need more players like ourselves in the marketplace to give confidence and comfort to both the investor and the occupier coming into the market. Now, another pet subject of mine is, and I think it's an important one in Africa for us all to be aware of and to try to enhance wherever we're able to, and that is education and training. I'll give you an interesting example. Somewhere like Lagos, there are actually no training, tech colleges, apprenticeship programs for construction industry trades, i.e. woodworking, bricklaying, plumbing, electrical. So what we undertake when we're undertaking a large project is to bring into play an academic program. So we as the client will bring in a teaching program with teachers to be able to take them through the course, and the contractor will bind in with us to actually provide on-site supervised training. This is an accredited, certified program, and we've been talking recently with City and Guilds to also bring them into the process as a certifying authority. So I think that is all from me. I hope that's been interesting and helpful to you.
That's been great, Peter. Thank you very much. And I know he can't hear me, so I'm in the background using my technology on WhatsApp to let him know what we're doing and how we're progressing things. But thank you very much, Peter. And we'll try and figure out a way to engage with him on the Q&A, even though he can't hear us, but I can pass messages on via WhatsApp while we're all talking. And I can see the Q&A is starting to get quite active now. People are asking questions. A few people have put questions in the chat. Can we ask you to please move those into the Q&A, because we're only going to monitor the Q&A in terms of asking questions to the panelists. So moving right along and trying to keep some pace, let's move on now to Jess Cleland, who's the Chief Operating Officer for Africa for Broll Property Group. Welcome, Jess.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks for the introduction and indeed for the invitation to join the panel today. Yeah, I'm Jess Cleland, COO for Africa at Broll Property Group. Broll is a property services company. We have operations on the ground in 13 countries across Africa and experience in almost all the others. And we're also the African affiliate partner of Cushman & Wakefield. So if we can move on to my slides, please. And I think an important place to start is really with an overview of some of the broader trends driving the growth in Africa. In other words, where are the opportunities and other demands that are competing for land or impacting the property market? And this is before I jump into what I really want to talk about, which is more the demand side of the equation. But I think some points to mention first, they do echo and support some of the points mentioned by both Ben and Peter. And firstly, there's this huge investment in infrastructure. Yes, we're seeing it from places like China, SGR in Kenya is a big success. You know, the Belt and Road Initiative has had a huge impact everywhere. We're also seeing the beginnings of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which aims to be the world's largest free trade area, which will connect almost 1.3 billion people. So with that boost in intra-continental trade, obviously comes the need for better logistics, warehousing, transport, processing, and so on. And I think the other key theme is e-commerce taking off across the continent. And obviously each country is at a different stage on the growth pathway of the digitalization of economies. But some are probably further than you think. I mean, M-Pesa, which is a mobile phone-based payment service, launched in Kenya 15 years ago already, which is long before a global pandemic forced the rest of the world into a virtually cashless society. So if we move on to my first slide, as I said, I really want to talk more about the demand side for space. So this is looking at tenants and corporates and companies and how they use real estate within Africa. Because really that demand for space underpins everything in a market. There is a lot of capital searching for yield in Africa at the moment, and it's the leases of those tenants that provide that income stream from which a property derives its value. So it's really important to understand what's happening in the space market. And this is what we are seeing live from our offices in 13 countries across Africa. This is where we see the interest coming from now, as in H1 2022. And I should clarify that this is where the tenant demand is coming from. It's not the investor flows, which Ben covered earlier. And really, we are seeing international users coming back into the market with new queries. Plus, there's a lot of local relocations, and I'll get into the reasons and drivers of that in a minute. But yeah, interest is probably, I would say, predominantly Europe, US, some Middle East, in addition to the local requirements. On the next slide, please, we look at the sectors in which these tenants operate. And it's nice, there's obviously some key themes. So we're starting to see in the majority of countries a nice diversification of industries. Technology is obviously a big one, and in particular, we are seeing data center operators being very active at the moment. There's a large uptake of land from data center operators who we think are sort of pre-positioning for the arrival of cloud operators. And in other cases where it's not so diversified, it's driven by specific industries, and Mozambique and Uganda being perfect examples of this. I think the recent signing of oil and gas agreements in Uganda has really opened up a strong stream of investment there, which of course comes with it, all sorts of ancillary needs and services around that industry. So on the next slide, please. So we're seeing demand starting to pick up again. And in some markets, you know, we are back to pre-COVID transaction volumes. I mean, residential in Ghana is probably a good one, as Tilda spoke about earlier. But yeah, there's still certain challenges of operating in Africa. I mean, let's not, you know, paint this glorious picture where there's no barriers. I mean, they exist, but they are all absolutely able to be overcome. And it's really done by connecting with local experts. Africa is driven by partnerships. You need that specialist local knowledge because there are 54 very unique countries, different legal and market frameworks. And as I said, all entirely navigable, but who do you trust? For example, I mean, those of you who are based in the UK, which I assume is probably most of you, you've probably seen, you know, for sale signs on land or properties. In Africa, we have signs that say this land is not for sale. And that happens all over the continent because otherwise people try to come along and scam and sell other people's land that they don't actually own. So you need to watch out for that. all of it, finding quality real estate data. I think we're making good progress, but how do you find things out? Traditionally, the markets are very opaque. There's no central repository of data. Everything is based on local, on-the-ground knowledge and networks. So again, you need to partner with that local knowledge. There's sort of broader challenges, currencies, USD versus local currencies, and there are restrictions around some of those. The number of headaches the Naira has given me in the past year. We've seen dramatic movements, huge spreads between, official versus black market rates, really constraining exchange controls, does make repatriation of funds difficult. Inflation is sitting at around, anywhere between 16 to 19% over the past few months in countries like Zambia, Nigeria, even Ghana, it's up to 12% these days. Getting around the place, COVID restrictions are starting to ease up in some countries, but there are still some testing requirements, which does get restrictive and expensive. And there's some legacy sort of mobility challenges, like limitation of flights. If you want to fly from the capital of Senegal to the capital of Nigeria, for example, or from Lagos to Libreville, you can't fly direct. So those sort of logistics just eats up time. And the land tenure options might be very different to what you're used to. There's very few freehold options, and long leasehold structures are probably more common in Africa than what you're used to in, say, Europe or North America. So in majority of countries, all land is owned by the state, and then licenses or long leasehold rights are granted usually for a period up to 99 years. In some cases, foreigners are allowed up to 50 years. But again, every country makes their own rules. But I would say that big strides have been made in formalizing land tenure over the past sort of decade and a half that I've seen. So there certainly is much more certainty and security around land tenure nowadays. So now more specifically, what is it that impacts the decisions of tenants? And it's funny, as much as I say and make the point that Africa is 54 different countries, it seems that there is surprisingly high commonality in terms of the expectations of tenants across the continent. And again, this is what we are seeing now from our clients across all our countries. And we tend to work with a lot of multinationals, blue chips, as well as the local tenants. And yeah, across the board, quality and flexibility are the two biggest issues at the moment. Now, the issue of quality, that's been around a while, whether it's building standards, building specifications, compliance, maintenance, adherence to a corporate's global guidelines. That has been an ongoing challenge for a while now. But the biggest change in the past year or two is flexibility, and the importance that tenants are placing on flexibility. That's right up there now. So we see this applying in two facets. So there's flexibility to the space itself in terms of how it can be used, as well as flexibility in the lease terms. And concurrently to this, we're also seeing a huge growth in the number of like flexible serviced office providers. Ben also mentioned it earlier. So we're seeing some it's aggressive and ambitious, but so far it's achievable expansions into and across Africa. So these service office or flexible office providers are clearly on the ball and looking to tap into this very concern of flexibility of most companies in Africa. So if we move on to the next slide, and it's really, so what does this mean when you put it all together? So what we're seeing for the occupiers of space, so the tenants generally, they definitely have a much greater ability to dictate terms at the moment. I think in the past, a lot of landlords, or whether through landlord decisions or regulatory requirements, some of the lease terms have always been quite rigid. We've not always seen tenant incentives, things like lease breaks or anything like that, or beneficial occupation, rent-free periods, tenant fit-out allowances. They've never really featured in a lot of African markets in the same way as they have elsewhere. That's all flipped around now, and all the power really is sitting with the tenant. It's generalizing, but these days, yeah, that's where we are. As I said before, flexibility is really key. Some tenants are much more willing to negotiate on flexibility versus rentals, just because of the uncertainty around the market these days. We are seeing a general trend towards an overall reduction in space requirements. There was a bit of a lag in the implementation of this. I think a number of corporates, number one, just wanted to see how hybrid working solution went. A lot of them were waiting for sort of global policies to be implemented to see if they had to follow those. Obviously, in some places, expecting people to work from home with reliability of internet and power is maybe not as much of a given as it would be in, say, the UK or Europe. But all of that seems to now be coming to a point where corporates are now finally making decisions and defining, right, this is what we want. So generally downsizing in the amount of space they use, but also looking to improve the quality and of course flexibility of that space. So especially for local tenants, for national companies in many countries, we are seeing sort of these horizontal relocations where tenants are seeking better quality space in a soft market where they can dictate or negotiate good, strong terms. If they can't get out of leases, then subleasing space is a big trend in a lot of places, and that does compete head on with the vacancies in landlord spaces because it often comes already fitted. There's usually furniture included, and it does make quite an attractive option within the market. So landlords, on the other hand, yeah, they are having to reduce some of their expectations around what they can achieve. And it's mostly about improving the flexibility of terms. In exchange for longer term leases, they're offering fitted solutions. We're seeing increases or improvements in tenant fit out allowances and so on. And we're also starting to see repurposing of assets, particularly in some markets or sectors within some markets that are completely oversaturated. And I think conversion in, say, Johannesburg, in South Africa, some surplus office space into different types of residential is a good example of that. So where that leaves the market, yeah, generally overstocked. In most cases, with the and not that there was sort of a huge over demand before. We still have the issue of there is still some legacy pipeline coming online, developments that started like right at the start of the pandemic that are still powering through. But again, coming back to that quality issue, there are some markets where grade A is understocked, despite a general oversupply in the market. And I would say Maputo is probably the best example of that. I think Kampala in the short term would also be a good example, but there is a pipeline about 130,000 squares coming on in the next sort of 24 to 36 months, which will alleviate the pressure in Kampala. Yeah, I mean, the past couple of years, demand has been muted, but the last 6 months, we are seeing definite signs we're starting to pick up from both local and international inquiries. That's all from my side. Thank you, Richard. I'll hand back to you.
Jess, thank you very much. There's some really interesting points that came out there, which I'm going to come back to when we have a bit of a Q&A discussion. But without further ado, you've all heard from some agents and consultants and a developer investor and of course our IoD Africa SIG. But now with at last but not least, Bruce Haswell from Turner & Townsend to take us on a consultant's view of building and developing your business in Africa. Bruce.
Thank you, Richard. And being the last speaker, do I have to go at a canter or are we okay for time?
We're okay for time. We've got some time for Q&A afterwards, so we should have no problem at all.
Okay, let's go through this at some pace then. So first slide, please. Just in terms of an overview of Turner & Townsend. For those of you who are not familiar with us as a practice, we are now in our 76th year, and we are a truly global business. I think the map doesn't even show that one project we did in Antarctica. We are just under 7,000 staff internationally, and recently we reset our purpose, vision, and values. So really, in terms of our purpose, we are focused now very much on green, productive, and inclusive objectives. And we really want to work with organizations who have these values also in mind. So you can see, or hear rather from the previous speakers, there's a lot of commonality in how we approach work and the sort of opportunities that we see arising in Africa. So ideally, we want to be known as the #1 professional services consultancy across Africa for project management and cost management. So please, next slide. So in Africa, where are we? We were established some 30 years ago in South Africa, and since that time we have gradually expanded our operations around various hubs. So we have South Africa as our main home in Africa, but we now have hubs in East Africa and SADC. And more recently, in the last 3 years, where I'm based in Nigeria, we now have a West African hub. So overall, our experience in Africa extends some 35 years. Our experience in Nigeria, for example, is probably close to 20 years. We're always out of a base in South Africa, but now permanently established here in Nigeria. We're just shy of 300 people overall, and we have 12 offices across the continent and are expanding. I'm now looking, hopefully in the next year, to expand into Ghana and have a permanent establishment there also. So please, next slide. So what do we do? Some of you may know us already. We're primarily known as cost managers. That's our very origins back in UK. Project management. We're helping clients with procurement, project controls and performance, and also working in the health and safety space as well. And we do that, as some of the previous speakers have said, with a healthy bank of knowledge, data, technology that allows us to perform advisory services at project level, program level, and at a portfolio level. So that's our basic model for Africa. And ideally, we're aiming to be the #1 organization in Africa for these services. Next slide, please. So in South Africa, we're particularly proud of our credentials in inclusivity and diversity. We are BBBEE level 1, which we've achieved over a number of years. And we're very proud of what we've done in terms of our practice around ownership, management and skills development, how we are inclusive in our procurement practices, and how we take a really good approach to CSR in all of our work across the continent. And that gives us very, very good ratings, always room for improvement, of course, but these practices we adopt all across our operations and offices across Africa. In most of our offices, we are run by and managed by, staffed by the nationals of each country. I'm unusual here in Nigeria. I am an expat here in Lagos, but our team here are all Nigerian, and that is the vision for us moving forward. We will be a Nigerian business. Okay, next slide, please. So there's a lot of commonality here between what I'm presenting now as top sectors for Africa in the built environment space with previous speakers. So absolutely, there's still a lot of growth within corporate occupier space. And we work with what we call our G100 globally to make sure that their home here in Africa is delivered well and to good standards. Of particular interest to us as a practice is the data center space. There's a lot of activity and growth in the sector, from a West Africa perspective, There's very few data centers located in the region, but a lot of interest coming now from different organizations. And these are a selection of our main clients, but there are more coming into the space. So again, for those of you who are not active in this space, you can see there's a lot of opportunities within data centers. Next slide, please. As part of our purpose, we're now, as I said in my introduction, very focused on renewables and clean energy. Now we see this as a massive growth space for us in professional services, advising in this field, as countries make, as companies rather, make the transition from their existing practices towards a transition to net zero assets and net zero emissions. This is driven by initiatives obviously out of, let's say, the COP practices. COP26 sets new standards for corporates across the world. And when they're operating here in Africa, also looking to adopt the same practices of reducing their footprint and having more reliance on renewable energy and better green practices. Again, in common with previous speakers, infrastructure, transport is a big growth sector for us. We're very, very active in this space across Africa. The amount of investment, as was mentioned earlier, coming into Africa has been very healthy and is increasing. The amount of infrastructure projects, particularly in Nigeria, is impressive. And we're obviously supporting many organizations to deliver services within that sector. So I'll move on finally to my last slide here for presentation. As well as giving an overview of what TNT do, I wanted to actually concentrate on the question of the Africa opportunity from a professional services perspective, and looking at this as being a PM and a cost manager, analyze this through a SWOT analysis. So, I mean, the strengths of the opportunity in Africa from a professional services perspective is the pool of resources we have here. I mean, there's a very motivated, very educated resource base here in Africa. And so when it comes to recruitment and development of staff, it's very, very easy because people have that willingness and motivation to join organizations like TNT and get involved in the sort of work and mission that we have. There's also a great opportunity around skipping a few steps in development to get right into data, digital services, to grapple some of the issues around innovation. And what I found really rewarding in terms of how people approach the delivery of projects, there's a real appetite to adopt lean practices. That's both sustainable, but it's really in keeping with the challenges around developing projects in Africa. There is strain on supply chains, strains on resources. So a lean construction approach is absolutely necessary to develop really, really good and successful projects. Also, in my experience here, there is a real open-mindedness about how we can deliver projects. So rather than following some, again, the more tried and tested practices that we've adopted in Europe and North America, when we bring projects to market here, there's a more innovative way of looking at how we can deliver. Again, mindful of our resources, mindful of our constraints around supply chains and capacity within the market to deliver projects. So those are real strengths that I see in taking things forward and we can develop. And that's then looking on to weaknesses. When reputationally, Africa has a very poor rep in terms of anti-bribery and corruption. We have to navigate those things very, very carefully. We're losing our place on the slides. Next one, please. Thank you. So as a practice, we adopt very, very stringent procedures around our procurement activities, our engagement activities, to make sure that we are maintaining the very, very best standards and regulation around anti-bribery and corruption. And that's required by investors. I was speaking to Joel earlier on this in the preparation for the discussion today. You know, what clients are looking for, what investors are looking for in Africa when they try and step into these opportunities is that assurance and governance that they need from reliable partners. So it's really developing a model to address these weaknesses to make sure that investments are transparent and well managed, well governed. One other real challenge, and Jess touched on this earlier as well, is just there's so many different standards that apply in different nations, and even within one country. Can you be sure about the measurement standards, the valuation standards, when you're talking in terms of transactions or in terms of data? Are we all talking the same language? And there's such a mix of standards and regulations within different countries. It's very difficult to really get to the bottom of, or have to have certainty rather, on how things are being exchanged and transacted. And there's a lot of work being done internationally through RICS and others around having good, strong international standards. But the take-up in Africa has been quite slow. In Nigeria, where I'm now, there's a more lean towards UK type standards. Egypt, where I was before, it's a real mix of different standards and regulations. We're finding commonality in how we talk around the built environment is becoming a real setback to investors coming in. So that uncertainty around assurance rather, is a real weakness in the way that we approach the market, how we can support clients. There's also, as I'm realizing, the more I discuss with people here in Nigeria, a real lack of consensus about what is the most important thing to take and to rise to these challenges. Is it around security? Is it around governance? Is it around anti-bribery and corruption? There's just so many things that seem to be done. No one can quite agree what is the most important thing, the most important objective to resolve in order to give that assurance for investors. So I think as a group of professionals within the working environment across Africa, we need to be better at explaining how we can actually meet these challenges and set our own priorities and to actually work through this as professionals to actually resolve these problems and resolve these weaknesses. Then turning to the threats, and this again maybe speaks to what Peter was talking about earlier in terms of quality of work. There's a real differential of qualities across different asset classes. This is a feature, I guess, of poor skills and training within the sector. So when we are commissioning buildings, the lack of oversight, lack of governance, lack of really good standards and regulation make it very difficult to define good quality and to drive good quality. So that's a threat to what we do as professionals. Equally, I find that we are competing often between national practices and global practices. Many times when we talk to clients here across different countries, are they really clear on the services that we are offering? Because they have a practice, obviously, of working with national organizations and national professionals. And when we talk about international methodologies and international practices and standards, it's often more than unfamiliar to some clients. So there's a process of having to educate clients around how we can manage that. And then finally, in terms of meeting client expectations and understanding what the service offer is, again, it's that unfamiliarity about what we do and how we can help. There's a real understanding about how we can get projects onto market in terms of capital expenditure. But what I'm really learning now is that there's a real gap in the market around planned maintenance and facilities maintenance. So a lot of the fine projects that we deliver soon find themselves in a really difficult situation because they are not well maintained, and there is no real culture of facilities management around many of the projects that we develop. So again, it's a question of educating clients, educating the market to upskill. So finally, turning to the opportunity. As a practice, we are obsessed with data, benchmarking, always looking to see how things have been done up to now to find those optimizations and improvements. And all of that's going to come through our digital services and our data collection. And events like today, really pushing forward thought leadership. I think that's something that's been rather on hold because of COVID, but you've been out in the market, really seizing and talking about the opportunities to do things better by talking about innovation, really looking at the future of professional services in the 5-10 years ahead and how we can deliver better for our clients. As Peter mentioned in his piece, there is a real difficulty around skills and training in many of these markets, and what responsibilities should we have as professionals within the market to upskill not just professional standards, but also to help through the medium of our projects, the trades and other skills that we should have within the supply chain, so we can get better output from all the stakeholders who are involved in any project delivery. And of course, my own particular hobby horse is how can I as an individual or as a practice at TNT drive better professional standards by encouraging membership of recognized international bodies. It's always good when a client sees that the organization or individual that he's talking to has a credential from RICS or CIOB or some other recognized international body that gives that seal of approval or seal of assurance that when you're talking to people that they understand exactly the standards and quality that's expected of the team. And finally, I think we see ourselves as disruptors within the market. I think there's an opportunity there for us to change how things have been done historically, to really look at how the supply chain is delivering, to upskill people, to look at new ways of creating domestic supply chains. And of course, doing this in a sustainable way, very mindful of the constraints that we have within each market, because resources and capacities are generally very, very limited, but the demand is very, very high. So that wraps up my SWOT analysis. I hope you enjoyed that, and I can share some of the points that I've mentioned here. But if there's anything I've missed and you want to add to this analysis, then please let me know in the Q&A later today. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Bruce. That was really interesting and a good overview of the development and the challenges you faced as a consultant. And I think everybody can sympathize with those. We certainly heard that from the other speakers as well. If we could get the gallery view with all the presenters, we only have a little bit of time left. We've suitably filled in for Martin's absence with everyone else, which is fantastic. We've had a good session here today. There are a few questions that have come through, and even though Peter's had trouble with the audio, I see he's managed to answer a few online, which is fantastic. So if anyone has any questions directly for Peter, the best thing would be to put them in the Q&A and he can see them and go ahead and answer them there. And I think Ben's answered a couple of questions as well. Joel has kindly provided his information. There is one question that came through that I wanted to put out specifically around FDI. And we've talked about the lack of FDI into Africa. And I think that gets back to some of the things Bruce mentioned about the ABC reputation and also the issues of maturity of the market and so forth. What can we do to really help investors overcome those challenges? And I guess I'll start with Ben on that one, because I know he was particularly vocal about that, and then circle back through Jess, and if Joel has any observations, and then Bruce as well. Peter will get the message over by the Q&A.
Sure. I think, as far as investing in Africa is concerned, there are various barriers. Some are imagined, some are mitigable, and some are real, hence the higher yields that you find on the continent. But formal barriers like legal ownership restrictions for foreigners in some jurisdictions, capital investment challenges, the ability of investors to repatriate their investments, tax barriers, lack of double taxation agreements, meaning you're getting taxed twice on the income from your investments, and informal ones like currency risks, legal and title risks, liquidity risks. That's your ability to exit, geographic risks, as Jess mentioned, not physically being able to get around the continent very easily, but quite apart from the fact that it's a massive place. Political risks, self-explanatory, cultural barriers, information asymmetry, different currencies, different measuring practices, scaling up, very difficult. We get US investors who want to invest, and there's just absolutely no way we can find the kind of scale that they're looking for. We can't meet their minimum lot size. Cost of borrowing is very high on the continent, but the one I want to focus on is currency risk, because it's the most interesting one. So you might say, okay, wow, I found an investment somewhere in Africa that's giving me a 12% yield, and yet you find that currency devalues by 10% per annum, and so your yield is looking slightly less exciting. And the way to mitigate that, I mean, there are a number of different ways of doing it, but you can either choose a country that's got a history of a fairly strong local currency, or there are plenty of investments out there. We have a number of them on our books that actually generate a dollar-denominated income, and they could be rented to organizations that generate a dollar turnover, such as those that are exporting. In Kenya, that would be perhaps vegetable producers, flowers, that kind of thing, or it would be organizations that are funded in hard currency, like NGOs, embassies, missions. But what you mustn't do is invest in a project that is dollar denominated purely because it is, without really looking behind the curtain, as it were. Because if it's a shopping center that's dollar denominated, at the end of the day, the retailers are just having to buy dollars to pay their rent. And so you might think that your income is secure because they're paying in dollars, but if their currency devalues against the dollar, their rent goes up. You may not notice that as your landlord happily collecting your dollars, but before you know it, they won't be able to pay that rent at all. And so you will have a false security there. But I think that's a very, I don't want to monopolize the Q&A. Obviously, we've got a lot to get through. That's a very quick snapshot of of the challenges and different ways in which they can be mitigated. But Africa does generate some fantastic returns. A lot of people are looking towards Africa now, particularly as we've had historically over the last few years, very low interest rates in the rest of the world. Cost of borrowing is high here. You know, the magic formula is to borrow very cheaply in the rest of the world and come and invest in Africa, ideally in a hard currency investment with double-digit returns, and we can help you do that. But you know, it's not that simple, and you will need professional help in order to do that from people like Jess and I.
Indeed, knowledge is power. Jess, your thoughts on that?
Thanks. Yeah, I think Ben really covered all of the elements, so I won't rehash those. But we cannot overemphasize this impact of the denomination of rents and the impact that they can have. So when you get the YouTube version of this, go back and listen to what Ben just said about all of that. I think from my side, to answer your question about what can we do about it, I think there are two key things that people either people looking to invest in Africa can do, and then what we as African professionals can do. So the first goes back to a theme that I tried to highlight in my presentation, which is the power of partnerships. So all of those issues that Ben mentioned, you know, whether it's legal, tax, finance, property, power, whatever it is, you know, there are experts who operate in these markets who can, you know, navigate their way around them. So finding those partners, don't go in and do it yourself. That's one way to pay some school fees. And then I think the other thing, like just generally the way it's always been, improving market transparency. So I think the work that, you know, that Broll, the Brolls of the world, the Knight Franks, the Estate Intels of the world are doing to improve transparency, getting information out there. It does provide provides more than data. It provides comfort and insight and you know, a platform upon which, you know, these markets can build and sell themselves as investment destinations.
Very interesting. Well, I think it's all exciting to see how it develops, and you know, as we can lure people, not lure people, but you know what I mean, convince people, give them confidence in the market. That's the main thing. I'm going to do one more question. Really unfortunate that we've run out of time, but we've had such a great session. I feel like we could be here all afternoon. One more interesting question that came in around smart cities development. This is for Bruce and Peter. Do you see, and I think it's also mentioning Nigeria specifically, do you see an update on the development of smart cities, which is critical to support real estate infrastructure needs and investments? I'll let Bruce start answering first, and I'll pose it to Peter via WhatsApp. He can type an answer.
It depends where in Africa you're talking about. I mean, in the East, definitely there is a lot of, sorry, WhatsApp call coming in there. In the East, there's a lot more appetite and possibilities around developing smart cities. Rwanda's done particularly well in doing this, you know, but where I'm in Nigeria, there's actually very little appetite to grapple with sustainability issues. It's a very oil-rich country, depends very heavily on oil and gas, and that transition is going to be extremely difficult. So there's not a lot of appetite locally for that. And as part of our mission here, we are doing what we can to show the benefits of clean energy, renewable energy, and trying to, again, create interest with internationals. But domestically, no, that's very, very difficult. There's such a dependency here economically on oil and gas.
Very interesting. Well, and I know, I think Peter's going to also type an answer to that question as well. And Jess, I see, has got the question about women in property in Africa. Very important to improve the representation. So, well, look, everybody, this has been wonderful. I'm going to have to wrap things up because I have a feeling that the system might actually kick us out sharp at 13:30. So I want to thank everybody who's joined us. Tilda from Estate Intel, Jess, Peter, Bruce, Ben, Joel Popola, and Tim, my cohort, for running things in the background for us. And of course, our own Jess Parker at the IoD headquarters for her support on this as well. I don't really have time to finish my IoD slides, but Tim, if we can go to them really quickly, I'll try and whiz through them in about 10 seconds to try and wrap things up for all of us. So just to Our next event, Expert Viewpoint of the Property Market, we'll be looking at London, UK, and global markets. That's Thursday, March 31st. A live event, 6:30, with panel discussion followed by networking. If you go to iod.com/London events, you'll see it there, and you can find the details on where it will be. We're just finalizing the location, so that should be up tomorrow. Next slide, please. That's our bigger calendar. I wanted to get it on screen because this will all be in the YouTube recording, so you can all pause it and take a more detailed look at it, but I'll keep going for now. Next slide. And then, of course, the sales pitch. You know, IoD is all about developing better directors for better businesses for a better world. We're the only organization given a royal charter to give out the chartered director qualification. And I encourage those of you who want to improve your skills in good governance and leadership. Something we've talked about is very important in the African continent. That good governance is so key for anti-corruption and confidence in the market to draw investors in. That's what IoD is all about. And you can see our director competency framework on the lower right there. Next slide, please. And furthermore, you know, developing your skills as a member of the IoD, please join us, iod.com/membership. And with that, I think we're just about 1 minute over. So sorry we couldn't spend more time with Q&A. I think certainly I could have spent another few hours here, and I think everybody else would have appreciated that as well. But we're going to wrap up now. Thank you all. I think I have one final slide with my contact information at the IoD, property.london@iod.com. If anybody has any questions or would like speaker information and contacts, I'll get people's permission to share whatever they wish and connect you all in going forward. So hope you join us in the future, and thank you all so much for joining us. Have a great afternoon.